Well, hello and welcome back to the Sports Journalism Podcast. And what a guest we have with us today. We have John Cross, Chief Football Writer at the Daily Mirror. John, how are you on this April afternoon?
I'm okay, actually. Yes. Looking forward to a busy end of season, which always gets me excited. Looking forward to a lot of football and a lot of excitement and drama.
Yes, certainly, of course, be it the Premier League, the Champions League, or of course the World Cup to come in the summer as well. But before we get into any of that, the first question I ask of any of the guests I have on this show is, where did your love of sport, and specifically in your case, football, because you're a football writer, where did that come from?
Oh, my dad really. My dad was massive football fan. Wouldn't miss a game. Home and away. Remember going from a young age with my dad to Highbury. He grew up absolutely in the shadow of Highbury on sort of kind of in Finsbury Park, and then basically loved it. Played football from such a young age. I do like other sports, by the way. I kind of had a sort of kind of brief stint in a boxing club, and used to play tennis. Love tennis and love paddle now. And always been very active. Like to run and kind of clears my head. So I've always loved sport. When I was clearly nowhere near good enough to play football to any sort of level other than Sunday and a lot of enjoyment five-a-side and what have you, then the next best thing was writing, really. So that's where it came from, without a shadow of a doubt.
You've literally answered my next question, which was going to be, no, it's quite all right, because in the same way that, the motivation for me at least, to pursue a career in sports journalism was, you want to be a footballer as a kid. I mean, from your point of view, it sounds like Arsenal, growing up in the shadow of Highbury. For me, I'd love it to have worn a black and white shirt at St James's Park one day, but that was never realistically going to happen. So the next best thing was going into sports journalism. And so how did that sort of formulate, and when did that idea come into your head that, yeah, this was the career for you?
Yeah, I remember actually, I loved English at school. Did do English. There was one particular teacher, I guess, really, really good on kind of, that helped a lot, was quite good, got us to do stuff and looked at media. There certainly wasn't a media course then, but it was social studies, I think it was called. So that together with English kind of made me think. And then kind of one of the things that we had to do was kind of write about something we saw on kind of, so certainly remember writing about sort of kind of matches and stuff and going to games and that sort of stuff. And I actually left school at 16 because it was very different then, I would say, in trying to get into journalism. And kind of, I felt as if that would give me a much better opportunity to then basically maybe get an apprenticeship on a local newspaper. So I kind of left school at 16, did do A-level English at night school, and then basically did actually get, wrote to every single local paper. Look, local papers were better then, I guess, more kind of, a bit more of a pathway, I guess. And when I say local papers, I mean the weeklies, if you like. There's still thriving evenings and still thriving weeklies, to be fair, but basically it was much bigger, good sales, and kind of, it was on the street and you'd buy a local paper. We'd definitely have a local paper in our house. And it was just a bigger market. And then kind of that was my first step. And then, sort of kind of writing, just hitting every local paper, and just showing a great deal of enthusiasm, I guess.
And I believe, according to my research at least, that one of the local papers that you ended up at was the Islington Gazette. Am I right in saying
Yeah,
that?
that was my first local paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, great fun.
So tell me how that, because you mentioned there that you wrote to all of them, and so how come that they were the ones that did they take a chance on you, or was it a case
Yeah,
of you
it definitely felt like that. And I guess this sort of kind of plays into one bit of career advice that I always kind of give, to kind of people. And I do get a lot of people reaching out, and I try and answer absolutely everybody. If anyone's listening and I've not responded, I promise you it's an oversight, because I basically think, I'm really passionate about young journalists and getting into journalism and doing the right thing. But I also think then that actually it was a bit coincidental, but I'll always be grateful for them, because honestly, how it's sliding doors moments. But then basically they happened So their kids happened to go to the same school that I went to. So kind of that maybe planted a seed in the editor's head that my kids go to the same school. Oh, that's interesting. And then basically, they probably got me through the door. And then basically, that helped. I showed an enthusiasm, willingness. And yeah, it was really, really, that was a great first step. But what I'm talking about and what I'm trying to express is that sort of kind of connection. So basically, never miss an opportunity to have a chat with people. You never know where it might bring or what it might lead. And a similar sort of circumstance, I remember that as being a sort of a real kind of turning point and basically kind of foot through the door.
And so in those younger years when you had sorry, at the Islington Gazette,
Yeah.
you mentioned advice there, in terms of never sort of passing up on a conversation. Were there any other important lessons or pieces of advice you received, perhaps from journalists who were above you at that point in your early years in reporting?
Yeah, I do remember one news editor who was quite it's very, very, I tell you what, this is quite out of step now with today, isn't it? But basically, my first newsroom, and it was a really busy newsroom, because back in those days, a really busy paper, really popular, sold well, and did do well. But it was very female orientated. And I was probably quite quiet. And then basically kind of a little bit overawed and inhibited, really. But then basically, I remember, yeah, it was quite, but I had one quite demanding, strict news editor, and they were good for me, actually, looking back. Probably didn't enjoy it at the time, but then basically kind of set standards and kind of doing things, getting to know the area and that sort of stuff, and, speak to people and both sides of the stories. It really, really drilled in good practice and basically kind of always get a second, response to the story, always take soundings. It's just basics. But I also think, I've obviously moved into sport, but then basically I did a lot of news. So it was a very newsy area, basically it was kind of the loony left Labour Islington Council at the time. And there's still people around now from that time. Jeremy Corbyn was one of the two local MPs along with Chris Smith, and basically Jeremy was nice and basically really good, and but it was newsy, and I followed it and kind of did police calls, and never ever forget did a few kind of, when people lose kind of loved ones, then you have to kind of do what's known as sort of in the trade as a door knock. You've got to do respectfully, but if the family kind of want to speak, and I think there's it showed to me that there's kind of basically more than one way to approach things. I think you can be polite, respectful, punctual, and I think just being yourself and just being down to earth, I think gets you a long way.
Yeah, I would say that's very good advice, John. Now, these days, I want to just bring this a little bit forward.
Mm,
Journalism is conducted via many mediums, and you've said
mm.
obviously in the past when you were getting into it, was a case of just writing to editors, etc.
Yeah.
Nowadays, journalism is it's print, it's digital, it's broadcast, it's whatever you sort of want it to be. If you're comparing it now to comparing it to when you got into it, how was it more difficult now, or is it more difficult then, do you think, in terms of making contacts, finding stories, with all the different ways you can find things now? Obviously, perhaps that makes it a little bit easier, but because there's so much going on, does that actually make it a little bit oversaturated in some circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's way more difficult now. I think it's really much more difficult now, if I'm honest. And I see it because I've kind of got, teenagers myself, basically. And I wonder sometimes that they're not going to go into the same industry. They don't really want to, but basically it's not their cup of tea at all. But I kind of think it's a challenge out there. And I think it's far more difficult to get into industry. One thing I should point out is that basically I did start on news. And I think that was a good grounding because it basically gave you a bit more of a, started on news and then moved across to sport and football. And I think that gives you a bit of an edge. And basically, you're not afraid to ask questions, put your hand up, make a fool of yourself, and on occasion by asking. I don't mind about asking difficult questions, it's fine, but some people do, I think, and it's a shame. And it gives you a different edge. But I do think it's harder now, and then basically there were more courses, but there were more papers and outlets in there. Whereas now there's definitely a broader spectrum, but I do think it's quite a saturated market, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
think it's hard to make a kind of a show and a splash. What I would say is that I do still think you can do that. I always refer to this in that basically we've got, I'm chair, very honoured to be chair of the Football Writers Association. And within that, we've got a few members. And I'll always remember one in particular who produced his own newspaper. He conducted the interviews, wrote them up, put them on the pages, produced the paper, sent it out, and basically let me see it. And he blew my mind. And basically, I thinking, right, that guy is going to go a long, long way. And basically, sure enough, he's got a good job, really good, and a good title, well-established media, brilliant. And why? Because it's obvious to me that basically he's gonna go the extra yard. He's incredibly talented. Really, really full of admiration and respect for him. It was obvious to me that if he could get himself in front of people, bang, he's going to do it.
That's very good. Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to pick up on that you just mentioned there was not being able to, be afraid to make a fool of yourself, which I think it's an interesting point because, people perhaps these days are, because of, as you say there, with all the mediums we can look at in terms of, social media, TV, radio, whatever it is. I think people are often striving when they get into to be absolutely perfect, but journalism is an industry where perhaps as you say there, you have to make mistakes to understand exactly how you get to a certain stage. Is that something that you'd agree with?
Yeah, I would. I think sometimes I go to press conferences and I can sense that people don't quite know what's going on in the room. And so basically, the manager might be talking, for example, about something that's happened before, and basically don't be afraid to ask and basically say, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this. Because honestly, if you come away from that and then basically not then know your subject or kind of not be fully informed, then basically, it's going to go wrong. I just feel as if sometimes just ask the question, and I think sometimes it works. And listen, I'm not a massive always, fan of kind of, the questioners being the story. I don't like those kind of viral clips of kind of, long, intricate questions and stuff about, and then filming themselves, recording themselves. It's not about, you in those circumstances. It's about getting an answer. It's about getting, sort of kind of to the story to get it. I just don't see it like that. And so, sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating in front of a lot of people. The cameras are on, a lot of people filming it, but that's what I mean. I mean, basically, just don't be afraid to ask difficult questions. Don't be afraid to ask a question that actually might sound a bit silly, but actually, if you're not quite sure, just ask. And then basically, it's the way to do it. Otherwise, you'll come away thinking, oh, what did they really mean? And have some regret, and I think just cover off your subject well.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially as well when you're in a room full of all the other reporters in the country as well, who are all competing for that sort of that line. So if you can get it out there yourself and be the one, then you've done your job. Now I want to come on to the Mirror because of course that's where you are these days, and I believe you joined them in 1999. Was that the big break you were always wanting, essentially?
Yeah, so I was on the Islington Gazette and then basically stayed there for 7 years. Went to an evening paper, and then basically also had, so that was interesting for about 2.5 years, and then basically also had a brief stint at an agency called Haters, and it was a great, very, very traditional grounding. And then basically, while I was at Haters, got regular shifts at the Mirror, and so was in sort of the Mirror from about 98. And then so basically I was shifting, got a staff job at the Mirror from 99. So it was yeah, really, really interesting actually. I was just thinking, oh, blimey, I've got I've got my I can't remember exactly the time when I joined. Yeah, okay, it was 21st of April 99 that I joined as staff. There you go. I've got a security pass, and yeah, it was. I got a massive thrill from seeing my name in on the national and print. Brilliant, loved it. And I tell you what, I did do some subbing. Obviously production at sort of kind of a couple of nationals before I went to, before I left the Islington Gazette. But I just felt as if I probably needed a bit more. So I kind of went, rather than kind of go in that direction, I just thought, okay, I can be better, I can do better. So rather than rush, I just kind of got a bit more experience. And then I really thought then when I was in 99, I kind of really ready for it, really hungry, and basically really wanted to do well. A former sports editor of mine sent me a challenge basically when I was in 98, said, get me 3 good exclusives and I'll give you a job. And then basically I like to think I delivered on that and then some. And then basically, yeah, he was a little bit cagey about actually giving me a job, and then another paper offered me a job, so he actually then found the job. So basically it all worked out in the end. But then basically yeah, it was competitive to get on the national then, but there were more places and basically people were recruiting. And it's obviously now it's very different, very different environment. But it was great. Yeah, that was definitely my ambition.
Yeah. Now, of course, as mentioned before, you are the chief football writer at the Mirror, and so do you mind explaining how you worked yourself? Because you said you mentioned when as a staff writer there, how did you work up to be at the point you are now?
Yeah, so I kind of joined and very sort of kind of junior member of staff, but I think I was all right because I was quite experienced even then. And then did games. I was actually athletics correspondent for a while. Was lucky enough to go to some Olympic games, but it was always kind of football was my main trade and love, obviously. But I kind of did like athletics. One of my great, sort of lifelong friends is an athlete as well. So kind of, sort of it was good. Very fortunate to go to Olympic Games, the pinnacle, and basically brilliant, loved it. And that gave you good experience as well. But then I kind of, by about 2004, I was kind of what you might call, maybe a bit before that really, but what you might call the sort of kind of the number 2 on the paper. So kind of had a chief football writer in front of me, Martin Lipton. There was a chief sports writer, Ollie Holt, by then, sort of kind of then. We had a great team. Those 2 guys are just absolutely fabulous. And Ollie is one of my greatest friends and inspirations. And you can learn. I learned a lot off laptop as well, as I call him. And then basically it was just a turnover, really. They both stayed for quite some time. And then it was, yeah, probably a good 10 years plus, really, before the opening came up, really. And, I then was lucky enough. It was post 2014, really, that I became chief football writer. So, yeah, it's a great honor. I love doing what I do. I love going to games, love seeing people and sort of having those connections. It's great.
And I think that's what's important, isn't it? Sort of loving the job
Mm.
in terms of loving the industry as well. I do want to come on to Arsenal though, because I think you're well known for covering Arsenal, certainly at the moment. I think a lot of people perhaps will know you for that. Are they going to do it this season in the Premier League?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I'll be perfectly honest. I think that Bournemouth defeat was huge for them. I did go through a period, before I became chief football writer for covering Arsenal, week in, week out. And I guess that connection sticks. And then basically kind of even did a book on Wenger and Wenger's time at Arsenal. And, I kind of broadened my horizons, but people kind of still do associate you with a club that you might have covered for, I don't know, 10 years, like literally day in, day out. It's funny, actually, because, when I was at the Islington Gazette, I knew people then that are still there now. How mad is that? And so basically, it's crazy, really. So I kind of do have those kind of long sort of kind of connections. So yeah, be interested to see what happens. But I think Arsenal looked tired, City look in the zone, and that's the difference, I think.
Yeah, and just on the connections thing, I think that's just the important of having these contacts that you develop perhaps at a young age, and sometimes they can still help you throughout your career as well. I also read last night on your bio in the Mirror that you always believe England have a chance. How do you feel ahead of this summer?
Yeah, I'm incredibly passionate about England. Do you know what? I'm a journalist that really believes in professionalism and impartiality. So, you know, I will always call it as I see it. I never get caught up in club bias and what have you. I mean, lots of people will say that, but honestly, I think actually I kind of always like to, you know, be professional, be, you know, objective and fair. But with England, I am quite tub thumping, and basically I think you're covering it for an English title as chief football writer. I think you can allow to be horribly biased in wanting to do England do well. I mean, you've got to be objective and critical at times. Please don't get me wrong, but you want to see them succeed. I think they've got a chance, but I think the conditions and the weather and the climate, and also on the back of an incredibly draining season, probably means they're in the second tier of clubs rather than, countries, I should say, rather than the kind of the absolute favourites. I kind of think Spain would be my choice, but I think it'll be interesting to see whether a European team could do it in America. But equally, you know, I do feel as if Spain are probably better prepped and in a better place than England right now.
I've read a lot of this, yeah, in terms of, you know, perhaps England might play Mexico and Mexico City in the last 16, and the altitude and the smog that might have an effect. Or
Yeah.
if you got to the quarterfinals and played Brazil in Miami in the heat, you know, that could be a stumbling block as well. Just on, you know, covering England in general, obviously you mentioned there just how much of a thrill it is. Is covering the three lions at a major tournament essentially, in the role you are now, the pinnacle of what you do?
Yes, it is. I love doing it. You know, World Cup 2018 was just magical. Never thought England could do that well, go that far. Gareth Southgate was a joy to work with, and basically, you know, fantastic. Had so many highs since, you know, and basically it was just incredible. What a story. And basically that is the pinnacle. I never understand why people suddenly think kind of, you know, newspapers or kind of, you know, journalists want England to fail. It's just not how it is at all. Desperately want to see them do well, and been lucky to kind of work through and live through this amazing era when you've had all the amazing talent of the golden generation, you know, never got past the quarterfinals, always failed at the sort of kind of in the big tournaments, in the big moments, and now this lot come along and just are an absolute joy, absolute fabulous. You know, what a generation of players, what a generation of players with mentality. And I just love it. It's brilliant. And so it is the pinnacle, and it gets you really excited.
Do you think you mentioned Gareth Southgate there? Do you think that the way he changed perhaps the media's relationship with England in terms of these big media days at St George's Park in the futsal centre, for example, or and just having that sort of better understanding between journalist, reporter, player, manager, do you think that made covering England from perhaps your point of view and others in your situation that bit more enjoyable?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think it was you know, there's a few things here that Southgate really looked at what was causing a breakdown in relations. What could he do to rectify this and improve this? And, you know, it was definitely us against them, to such a point then that basically, you know, there was a great story in Euro 2016 that there was the players' darts tournament going on. And basically it was so secretive and quiet about this that Joe Hart, in an interview, refused to say who was good at darts. And so basically this became a bit of a, you know, a thing, basically. And so even to the point of kind of when they went out, someone, you know, kind of in the mix zone saying, yeah, but who was good at darts? I mean, it was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. And it was just played into this kind of secrecy. And, you know, it was Roy Hodgson, Ray Lewington, and Gary Neville, by the way, kind of, you know, then sort of kind of in charge. And it was just a totally wrong attitude towards the media. You know, and I love Roy, and Ray Lewington's a great bloke as well. And obviously Gary's in the media now, so it's a bit of an irony, but there was this disconnect. And then so Gareth Southgate then basically kind of thought, how am I going to do this? And this is a guy that used to work in TV, Gareth. And so Gareth would actually, you know, kind of be quite friendly and sort of kind of approachable, even played, you know, kind of cricket and football on the beach with a few of us and sort of stuff. And, you know, when he was working as a pundit on ITV, and good, all-round good guy, who basically thought, how am I going to overcome this? And wanted to strengthen it, remove the pressures and shackles, sets up the darts tournament, and basically it was between players and the media. That's what that's all about. It's probably run its course now. Well, in fact, it definitely has run its course now. They need to do something else. But it's fun. It was fun while it lasted, and basically it was it was good. But that's what that's all about, and it just broke down some barriers, and basically it was good, and it showed the importance of the media, and then basically a positive media, and then basically about sort of England and what have you, and sort of kind of players telling their stories, feeling as if they're free, and it shows actually there was a masterclass in good kind of working and media relations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I've been reading a book recently, and that's sort of why I've come onto that question. So I thought it was good to mention. Now, last question on England before my final two questions to wrap up the whole podcast. What is your starting 11 this summer? Because I've spoken to others, and I'm trying to compile the sort of what the media thinks should be England's starting 11 for the upcoming World Cup.
But mine rather than
yours. Yes, what yours is.
Yeah, well, I would go. I'll be really bold. I'll go Pickford, Trent Alexander-Arnold, John Stones, Mark Gay, Nico O'Reilly, Declan Rice, Elliot Anderson, Bukayo Saka, Jude Bellingham, Marcus Rashford, Harry Kane.
Very good. I mean, I think you're the first person who's mentioned Trent Alexander-Arnold. I should.
Well, I know it's not going to happen, and I like Reece James, but I just think sorry, but that's why I've got.
No, as I say, everyone's entitled to their own opinions on this, and I'm just trying to collate to see exactly where people are at this stage, with perhaps a couple of months to go until everyone's in America. Now, moving away from England in the World Cup, final two questions: what have been your best and your worst moments in this industry?
Covering England at the World Cup. 2018.
The reason I ask worst is because I think it's important for those who are perhaps watching or listening to understand that not everything will be sunshine and roses. That you have to deal with perhaps not so good moments when working in journalism.
I think just it's challenging at the moment. I would say it's challenging at the moment, and see people, really, really talented people that you work with, kind of being made redundant, losing their jobs is as hard as anything. I think I care about people, and I really worry about people, and the industry is challenging. So I would say that by far, really, to see good talented people,
That's a very fair answer. And then finally, the final question is: sports journalism is a fast evolving industry, as we mentioned before. So many different ways into it, and there's so many different ways of conducting it as well. I asked you before about advice you received. So what advice would you give to those perhaps who are in your situation now?
Be passionate, be punctual, be polite, make an impression, always take that cup of coffee, always make connections, be bursting with enthusiasm, be well prepared, be open to absolutely everything, to different mediums. It might not be that first ideal job, that you get into. I've mentored someone recently, and she brings me so much joy in that basically she went for a few jobs, she's lacking a little bit of confidence. Maybe, I won't say who, but it embarrassed her, but basically then didn't get that job and was a little bit worried about that. Has now gone on to a sort of slightly different role, but there's lots of media opportunities there, and she's absolutely brilliant, and she's great, and she's the person that kind of, I look to, and others alongside as well, and thinking, right, okay, you're really going to make it. Be open to every opportunity, because you never know what it might lead to. And so, I'm really passionate about young journalists and young people making it, and basically I really want to sort of kind of see them succeed. I think if you follow those kind of guidelines, hopefully you can get into a rapidly changing but still exciting industry.
Yes, very good point on which to end. Now, just to let you have your moment, John, for those watching and listening, where can we find you online, in print?
Oh, okay, yeah, online, in at Mirror Football, in print, Daily Mirror as chief football writer, and yeah, I'm on X, John Cross Mirror, and basically I try and be better at sort of kind of, you know, work Facebook and sort of Instagram and those sort of kind of similar things there as well. So you can find me there. But I do enjoy doing a lot of podcasts which are there under the stable of kind of, you know, Mirror Football, Mirror Sports. So I really enjoy doing those. Actually, do a bit on Sky, yeah, a bit on 5 Live, which I love radio, and yeah, hopefully keeping busy.